We are back in the car for another Requel Pitch podcast episode. I'm your host, Tyler. And here on the Requel Pitch, what we do is we take a existing property or film series, and sometimes I'm by myself in the car. It's where I like to do my pitches. It's something fun and interesting to do. And sometimes I have a guest, and what we do is we take that property and we let you know, hey, if I was in control, I would either remake it, reboot it, make a sequel, and we talk about what we would do. So today's conversation is about reboots. Not that cartoon from the 90s, people. But we're actually going to be talking about rebooting 2 franchises. And I think this works well because it can appeal to different demographics while making a stronger core story. And I originally had this idea, and I actually started writing it and working on it as a comic book years ago. And the worst thing about being a comic book writer, people, is being the writer and not having an artist or trying to find an artist who wants to work with you, because comic books are all about the art. And when you're the writer, nobody cares until you're a big name like Scott Snyder, Jeff Johns, Brian Azzarello, Grant Morrison, etc. But the story is about the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet. Now, both were pulp type heroes, and they started on radio, then early television. But the thing is, the Green Hornet naturally is the great grandnephew of the Lone Ranger. Now, granted, nowadays you have to space that out, and I haven't done the math, but I would just say descendant of the Lone Ranger. Okay? And the idea is we open up with, our action scene, and it's set in the West, and it's the Lone Ranger. And it's not a Lone Ranger origin story, okay? It's not a Lone Ranger origin story. And you have this villain group doing something. Now, I know the easiest thing to do for anything is we need a villain. We need something to stop. Drugs. And you know what? For the time being, I'm going to just say drugs. Okay, I know it's horrible, but it can be about establishing in the West. We had a lot of Asian migrant workers, opium. It could be about, the Lone Ranger stepping on what was becoming the first high-class drug trade. It's a little bit of an older Lone Ranger, okay? So, he's a little older, and he tries to stop this drug trade. He's investigating, and we have this action scene at the beginning, and the big action scene ends where kind of that could have been the, say, death of the Lone Ranger. All right, then we jump ahead, and we have young Britt Reed. Now, I know about a few years ago, like, this movie was done with Seth Rogen, and I thought to myself, like, man, if he could pull off this and start to show his serious side, this could be an interesting thing, because he lost all that weight. He got in better shape. And the actor that they got to be Kato, amazing. Amazing. But he didn't, and it sucked. The tone was all off, and Seth Rogen just played Seth Rogen like he always does, as an idiot. And then in 2013, we did have The Lone Ranger, which I enjoyed, but quick points. One, the Lone Ranger wasn't as competent. The characterization should have been a man who's actually a very good shot, very good at what he does. He's just put it down and wanted to be a lawyer, and he's kind of talked about he relinquishes violence. And then when his brother is murdered, he has to go against his oath, pick it back up, and become the Lone Ranger. And the idea is he's there making sure that his sister-in-law and his nephew are protected. That's the love story. There's no romance between him and his sister-in-law. Because if you do that, you have to build a backstory. She really loved him first, but he left, and so she kind of settled on the brother. And that's not what we're here for. And the way that movie told this narrative through Tonto didn't really work. They should have just exited that out. So both were decent in their own way, but they're so much better for these characters. So you pick up now in modern day, and this is kind of a Green Hornet origin story, and it's about I'd say, just out of college, Britt Reed. He has money, a family legacy, empire kind of thing, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's kind of goofy, playboyish, but not Seth Rogen style. And his dad, you have his dad die, okay, kind of similar to the reboot that we had, but the idea is his mom's still alive, okay? So we're going to do that here. Dad dies. Britt has kind of stepped up to take care of, but he starts digging into some old family stuff that he had heard rumors about, but he starts finding it. He finds his ancestors' journals. And this is where he learns that his ancestor was the Lone Ranger. And he starts reading, and we get flashback type scenes of telling him the story. And then something does happen where there's an event currently with crime, and he's the newspaper editor now. He's kind of overseeing it. He's not active part of it, and that drug trade reminds him of something that he read in those journals. And then it ends up him putting on a mask and becoming the Green Hornet, and it's kind of this parallel, like I said, story of what he discovered through his ancestors' work, and then he gets Kato. And I think that is a big, interesting way. And we go about, I think, Kato, a different way of Kato coming in, more of someone who is also trying to fight the drug trade, because it goes back to like his culture, his people, and he was against that because the triads, and he was fighting it on his own. But now you have these two people who are starting to pull their resources and work together and form this alliance. And it parallels kind of the story of Tonto and the Lone Ranger. And I think it would be very interesting because we've had a hard time rebooting pulp characters. Okay, and if you're wondering what that is, recently we had Tarzan, directed by David Yates, with Alexander Skarsgård. It was okay. We had, of course, the Lone Ranger, Green Hornet. In the 90s, there was the Phantom and the Shadow that didn't light the world on fire. We had John Carter from Mars. And these are all the type of heroes that weren't exactly comic book. They were precursors with radio and magazine and stuff and Zorro. Zorro is like on the border. That helped usher in the era of the comic books. Now, Zorro, I know there was like a recent TV series that was done, but I think it was Spanish made. I cannot remember. I have not seen it, but I saw the advertisement for it. It was on a streamer. So for the most part, these characters have had a hard time really coming back into populace. They're not literary. Like Robin Hood would be literary. Okay, there's a difference. So I'm just thinking like this would be an interesting way of bringing these characters back and tell a family story and a multi-generation about who this family was. Now, the other thing that I could tweak on the pitch if I really wanted to, and the more I think about it, is that pulling from Kevin Smith's Green Hornet run, is you have the dad die, and that was Britt Reed, and the story is about Britt Reed Jr. and Kato's daughter. So what you could have is, the idea of generations of like the sins of the father being passed, or the idea that a family who is sworn against something continually battling to protect the world. So the mantle kind of gets passed, and that might be the better story as I think about it, so that you're not really doing same beats before. So it's kind of the origin of Britt Reed Jr. as the Green Hornet. I think a Kato who's older, who maybe has a a broken leg that didn't heal right, so he hasn't been inactive. But then something causes Britt Reed to go into action, and Britt dies. And it's kind of a parallel to the opening scene. And with Britt's death is when the journals get to Britt Reed Jr. And it's there that our story takes place. And it's about, a family and the generation. The trick about, with the Phantom was, in the Phantom, the ghost who walks, they made everyone think that he was immortal because the oldest son, would inherit the mantle of the Phantom. And I think that's with an interesting story because they never talked about, I haven't read a whole lot of Phantoms, so don't quote me on this, about if there's more than one child. But I'm going to keep workshopping this because I think there's something there. It kind of hit me today. I was talking with a friend who got a Lone Ranger t-shirt, and we were just kind of talking about it. But I think an idea of bringing these characters back in one movie where it's telling this parallel story and who these people are as a family, where do they come from and why they do what they do. So you have almost a dual protagonist with Britt Reed II and the Lone Ranger. And I think it'd be something really, really nice. What are your thoughts? Hit me up, Jtypatrick@gmail.com for your thoughts. Leave a comment below. And if you have an idea for a pitch or a movie you want to discuss, email me or leave a comment. We'll get in touch.